So I said there were certain words that went together in understanding faith toward God. One was epistemology, which had to do with the assumptions that underlie your decision making when it comes to the matter of faith toward God. Namely, that you must believe that God exists as your Father, and you'll find Him when you diligently seek Him. These being the twin assumptions of your faith, the twin bases on which your faith sits. The hypostasis element of that, which is how you stand on those assumptions. And what is the outcome of standing on those assumptions? Well, standing on those assumptions will first be tested. And the testings require of you a response that has to do with you increasingly becoming stripped or shed of your own abilities. So much so that you'll find yourself at a certain point in this journey of Histemi, journey of hypostasis, in the position of Histemi, which is you lie down as if you're dead. The analogies being behind the door and behind the stone. Because the word faith in its applications imply both of these concepts. That you are protected in a condition of great vulnerability. When you are told in the book of Ephesians, which talks about faith as a shield that quenches the fiery darts of the enemy, you're told, and take to yourselves the shield of faith. This is Ephesians chapter 6. Speaking of the armor of God, it says, take to yourselves the shield of faith with which you'll be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. Now, the word shield is the Greek term oskuro, O-S-C-U-R-O, oskuro. And we get the English word to obscure from it, to obscure. Obscuring is a manner of shielding. And it refers to it has two metaphors that often employs this very concept of shielding. One is a door. So you may find refuge in the house of a father, hence the term door. And I've already referred to this, but I want to elaborate just a little bit more now. The house of a father, because a father acts as a shield to quiet the emotions of the soul that relate to a sense of worthlessness, a sense of abandonment, a sense of rejection, sense of being unwanted, sense of being lost. And it's telling us that you can't put together a program for self-improvement that can get you past those emotions. Because those are emotions that are based in your experiences. Experiences that may even have started out in you from your mother's womb, where the emotions of the mother, when the communication was about you being carried in the womb, and such communications might occur between the mother and the father, or important persons in the life of the mother. And words of rejection, words of criticism were spoken over the mother, and she experienced the emotions associated with those words, that those words produced emotions in her soul. And those emotions were passed down to you. While you were a helpless infant in virtually embryonic form, your first emotions would have been those of your mother, as those emotions relate to your mother's sense of whether or not her action or her being pregnant with you was a good thing or not. If those were her emotions based upon her encounters, and those became the basic emotions of your soul, you won't even know that these are your default settings. Whenever those emotions would be triggered in you, you wouldn't know where they came from, but they would affect you in all the ways that those emotions do affect you. How is God going to build on that when your enemy is knowledgeable about the existence of these emotions and comes early to you and stays long and works on you in your emotions and observes when those emotions are stirred, and you not knowing that these are what is stirred, you react, and you react predictably. The enemy, you see, doesn't need to know your thoughts. He can observe your behaviors when those emotions are stirred. And that's what you're going to do predictably 100% of the time. Now, you may observe that when you feel a certain way, you employ certain behaviors. And psychologists and psychiatrists help professionally to manage these impulses and or to manage how you react when you are strongly influenced by these emotions. But nobody pretends that this is a cure for anything. And for the most part, the suggestions for coping require illogical address of these feelings that you have. And that's why the solutions cannot last. Because a logical understanding is never appropriate for what is effectively an emotional meltdown. It's worse than applying a Band-Aid to a deep wound. It's really that it's not the appropriate procedure. It's not the appropriate remedy. It's like, it's difficult to think up of an example right now, but it's like drinking bleach when you have COVID. That's the one that came to my mind. It's pretty stupid. That solution, I mean. But it illustrates the point. A logical solution is not capable of effectively addressing an emotional issue. They're very different things. Logic and the process of reason is based in facts. And if the problem and the solution were factually based, then it might work. And the reason that reason doesn't work is that the soul's emotions are not reasonable. You feel like you feel. And you don't need any facts at all to feel that way. And in fact, when you're stirred up by an emotion, you revert to feelings that you don't even know where they came from in the first place. And because your enemy knows these things and knows how you're going to react, he's ready to take full advantage of what is known to be a predictable response. Now, even when the issues are not likely to be entrapping, they may capture you anyway, and predict what you're going to do. I'll give you an example. I came home one day some years ago from lunch, and I'd eaten a good lunch. I was not hungry. I walked into my house, and the aroma of curry was in the air because my wife was preparing a curry dinner for that night. As my sense of smell was inundated by the curry, all of a sudden, on cue, I began to salivate. So a different one of my five senses was activated. I looked over on the stove and there was the pot with the curry. So my sense of sight was activated as well. So smell was activated, taste was activated, sight was activated. And I walked over to the stove where the pot was. Automatically, I lifted the lid to look at and to smell the curry, all the while salivating, until the voice of reason spoke from behind me and said, "It is not ready." That was my wife, and she broke me out of that reverie where all of my actions involving my five senses were triggered automatically. And it was totally illogical. I wasn't hungry. There was not any whiff of my being hungry. I was full. I'd just gotten up from lunch and had come home. What am I telling you? I'm telling you that things that are in your life from way back are stirred when certain emotions are stirred. In that emotion, I was a hungry 5-year-old boy waiting to eat his lunch on a faraway place where I was born. So you don't have a defense to these things. Certainly not a rational defense. And your enemy knows what you're feeling. What you're thinking is sidelined. It's all about what you're feeling. And your actions are going to be predictably along a particular arc that have to do with your feelings. Now, I gave you a more pleasant example of it, but I also alluded to a more sinister example, which is of a type that endangers you to the control of your enemy. why then would God want you to lie down in a defenseless posture, which we've defined in Scripture as Histemi? Why would God want you to lie down as if you are dead? Why is faith referred to as a shield? And the references to that being a door, as in a family home, descriptive of the role of a father, or the stone that is rolled in place to obscure the body from view, from external viewing. Well, it's because faith functions in that way. When you are lying down in death-like trust, something happens that is defined by the term Histemi. Now, if logically you reason, if I'm lying down dead in an environment that has killed me, environment in which I am helpless, then the only outcome is a rotting corpse. But that's not what faith is about. Faith has two elements. One is what you do, and the other is what God does. Faith is bilateral. The foundations of this epistemology are: you must believe God exists as your Father, and therefore you must trust Him as such. And the other is, God must act as your Father. And how He acts is like a reward to you for believing that He is your Father. And that's the portion that has to do with Histemi. That word, Histemi, Histemi. It's what God does. To explain the word Histemi, let me talk a little bit about a medical application of an English word derived from this Greek word, Histemi. It's the word histamine. Histamine. Now, a histamine anticipates. Histamine is a medical drug, or an antihistamine is a medical drug that is meant to counteract what histamine or histemi implies. Histemi is not what you do, histemi is what God does. When you lie down, and I'll use the analogy, the medical analogy, to illustrate the principle. When you lie down as if you are dead in an environment of allergens, in an environment that is opposed to even you breathing, your body is designed to produce excessive fluids in the affected organs to cushion the impact of these attacks upon your person, of these allergens attacking your person. So your body produces an excess of fluids to cushion the impact of these threats to these systems. Now, the result is called histemi. The body's defenses are to produce histamines, which are the fluids that cushion the affected organs. But as in the case of your breathing apparatus, your sinuses, if too much cushioning by way of fluids is produced, it can block the airways, and you may have difficulty breathing. You're not in danger of drowning or suffocating necessarily, but it is very uncomfortable and your breath would be labored. So medical science have devised ways to produce a limitation, to limit the fluid or fluids that are produced by this histemic reaction. These drugs are called antihistamines. They're not meant to cut off the production of the fluids because they recognize that the fluids are valuable for the protection of the affected organs. But they realize that the byproduct of excessive production of fluids may be by itself at least uncomfortable, if not outright harmful to you. And that's why they call them antihistamines. What is the application here? When you are lying down in blind trust of God, in an environment opposed to your existence, where you're surrounded by emotions, bombarded by emotions that are subject to the capture of demonic spirits, and with that, the relevant spiritual torment. What does God do? God is the histamine. He arises in the moment of your vulnerability. And it is in the nature of God will reward you with His presence when you diligently seek Him, so your faith is not the faith of a fool. You're never going to be in danger when your reason tells you you are in an environment of severe danger. You're never actually going to die in that condition, because God will rise up as only He can and bring the effective cure to your dilemma. In the case of Jesus, Jesus trusted Him implicitly, even unto death, and the cure then was not sparing His life. The cure was more permanent than that. The cure was to resurrect Him from the dead. We who trust God, under the hand of God, are rarely called to expire in our physical lives, to die, when we are going through the trials that actually bring us to the end of any and every ability we have to make a way for ourselves. But what God does is He visits us in that time. And when we are dead to our abilities, when we are dead to our expectations, when we are dead to our hope that things will continue on in more or less the same fashion that they were before we are brought to these crises of faith, when that happens, God will resurrect us in a transformed mindset. This is how it works. So I am not telling you just to believe and double down on believing that God needs to give you what you're asking God for. That's rarely the outcome. But always the outcome has this element to it. You become better aware of the faithfulness of God, not only to save you in the trial, but to bring you out renewed, refined, ennobled, greater than you were before the trials attended you. And with that comes a growing maturity in your understanding of God, and also a growing maturity in your understanding of yourself. With both, a growing understanding of your relationship to God, because you know who God is, that He will not leave you. He will not leave a righteous person in a condition of decay and hopelessness and helplessness. But He will cause you, He will stand up in the midst of your circumstances, and in doing so, He will reveal Himself to you in a much greater way and to a much greater level of understanding than you had before the trial. So no trial at the time is either pleasant or welcomed. In fact, it is routinely painful, and it tends to exacerbate your worst fears that you are going to die in this place. And a version of you dies in this place. But the version of you that comes out of this place can never again be successfully attacked by the same schemes of your enemy that one rolled out against you previously would always bring you to this place of hopelessness and despair. So what then is faith? It's experiencing the goodness of God in a measure produced in the environment in which He puts you for trial. And when you experience God in that capacity, at that time, then your belief structure in the ability of God to act on your behalf whenever is necessary, and to even overcome your fears and overcome the schemes of your enemy in those times of your vulnerability, that becomes the resident result in you. Therefore, faith is the substance. When you stand on what you hope for, you will actually be given the evidence that what you trust in and who you trust in, though it's not fully revealed and only revealed in the measure in which it's revealed in that trial, that in the end, all of what you've been called to be by God, all that you've been called to carry of His presence, all of the reasons for which you were put here in the first place, will come to be that which defines your existence upon the earth. And because that is eternal in nature, transcending time and space, and even your life, the entirety of your life, then your faith in the Lord is the way you are supposed to live. And He equips you, readies you in every way for every permutation of that. So you were made to be the carrier of His glory, the glory of His person, and the exact representation of what He created you to put on display in the world among your fellow human beings. That, you see, is actually faith. But these idiots have told us faith is to tell God what you want, being mindful of what God wants from you, which is usually money. And by the way, their address is where the money is to be sent. And you can live your monetary and health best life now. You see the difference? Who would want that ignorant gospel when faith is the manner of your relationship to God Himself, as opposed to certain goods and certain items? My problem, summarized with this foolish definition of faith, is that the proponents of it do not ask God for enough. They're ready to settle for more money than they're used to making, and results in their domestic lives that are greater than they can attain to themselves. But their gospel, from beginning to end, their understanding of the term faith has been thoroughly domesticated to the point where it lacks any eternal value. And I'm saying it's time to elevate it back to where it was, because underneath that vast umbrella of faith toward God, every provision for what you need exists, but it does not exist as a specific boutique focus. Now, I want to talk to you about faith in growing confidence in God through the stages of your sonship when I come back. Until then, I'll see you. Bye-bye for now.
May mercy, grace, and peace be with you always. Thank you for watching.